Intimate partner abuse, or the sexual revolution, involves softcore sadomasochism. I like to start off with a definition of what it means when we say sadomasochism. Sadomasochism is actually two words, and by definition, these two words describe sexual problem behaviors that are associated with sexual arousal and is usually consensual. Sadism and masochism are two words that describe sexual problem behaviors that are associated with sexual arousal and is usually consensual. Sadism is the sexual pleasure derived from the infliction of pain, suffering, or humiliation on the intimate partner. Masochism is the sexual pleasure derived from having pain, humiliation, and suffering inflicted upon themselves. Masochists have sexual desires of pleasure from being choked, tied up, bound, beaten. In order for clinicians to determine if S&M is a psychological disorder or not, we refer to the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-4. DSM is an acronym that stands for Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 4 meaning it's the 4th edition. DSM-4 gives us the definition by describing the patient reports intense sexually arousing urges in which psychological or physical suffering of one person is sexually arousing to the other person. Sadistic acts or behaviors include blindfolding, beating, rape, using objects, cutting, torture, strangulation or choking, burning, pinching, etc. I'm reasonably sure there are probably thousands of people who are viewing this webinar who would never even consider S&M. Even Webster's dictionary defines sadism as a sexual perversion. A perversion meaning it's a sexual practice that's considered unacceptable, in which gratification is obtained by inflicting physical or mental pain on others. Masochism, as defined and described in DSM-4, the patient reports intense sexual arousal from being beaten, humiliated, pierced, bound, or made to suffer. Masochists delight in experiencing humiliation, being sexually aroused by being forced to crawl, bark, abused, even cross-dressing. Self-mutilation is also a common act among masochists. These acts are usually done in orgies, clubs, groups, using prostitutes much of the time, and their intimate spouse or intimate partner the other part of the time. I want to mention hypoxophilia, which is a very dangerous form of masochism that involves sexual arousal by oxygen deprivation. Oxygen deprivation by using choking, plastic bags, or nooses that can be done by masochists alone or with a partner. usually with a consenting partner. To illustrate the point further, I would ask you to recall a feature film and a trilogy, meaning 3 books, entitled 50 Shades of Grey, which is really about a 21-year-old virgin who meets a 27-year-old billionaire and gets involved in a BDSM relationship. BDSM is an acronym that stands for bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, and sadomasochism. The book and the films were both hugely successful on a commercial level. The book, at last count, had sold 70 million copies worldwide and was on the bestseller list for 1 year or more. These successes aroused the curiosity of researchers, and 3 researchers from Ohio State University analyzed the books and the film and concluded that it glamorized BDSM. It glamorized abusive behavior toward women. The research study showed that the highest percentage of women who saw 50 Shades were already in abusive relationships, which sort of hints to us that these women may have seen and consumed the film and the books in an attempt to come to grips with the situations, the abusive relationships that they found themselves in. The study further illustrated that 58% of women who read the book found that it had a positive impact on their love lives and encouraged them to take more risk in their sexual encounters. 42% of women who saw the film and read the book stated that it made them think about having their intimate partner use handcuffs, sex toys, etc. during their sexual encounters. 38% of the women who saw this film and read the book stated they were excited about being spanked to increase sexual pleasure. Needless to say, the dangers of participating in sadomasochistic games is that it places the role players and the participants at risk of being injured. Injured because in a desperate attempt to achieve heightened levels of sexual arousal, the acts will increase in severity over time, which will then result in injury, and in some cases, accidental death. You might be wondering how this can happen. Through social engineering, via mass media, word of mouth. Our society is being slowly and steadily given misinformation. Misinformation glamorizing BDSM by calling it rough sex, bondage play, kinky games, or kinky sex. The worst part is that the softest targets are our inexperienced and impressionable teenagers. For example, a well-known parenthood education organization that receives funding from the federal government of $850 million per year has released an instructional video entitled Getting Kinky, BDSM 101. The title of the video, I say again, is Getting Kinky, BDSM 101. The caption reads, "Sadomasochism is fun and an adventure. Imagine your children being slowly and gradually conditioned to believe that they should consent to being tied up, choked, beaten, burned, in order to increase sexual arousal in themselves and their intimate partner." And this is exactly what will happen if we don't examine this disturbing trend. BDSM with a more critical eye. If we don't examine this trend with a more critical eye, we will find ourselves as a society being more receptive and beginning to slowly accept this as normal, especially BDSM, because the deeper we get into this subculture, the more hardcore versions of it become very harmful. Society wants to sell teens on the idea that pain is exhilarating in the context of sex, and that it makes sex unusually exciting. But if you stop and think about it for a moment, it is still intimate partner violence. If you stop and think about it for a moment, intimate partner violence is still being done using another name. It's abuse by another name, which is a win-win situation for an abuser, who will usually describe themselves as the sadist or the dominant, and their unwitting partner as the masochist or the submissive. As clinicians, our biggest concern is the safety of our patients, which is hampered by the code of silence that the parties who play kinky sex games agree to and consent to. And from a legal perspective, because it's consensual, because of the consensual agreement between these two parties, sometimes even in writing, their hands are tied to a large extent. However, we are making significant progress in identifying victims who come to our emergency rooms. Fear and shame are also obstacles that are difficult to overcome. We always make sure to interview victims of intimate partner abuse in a private room with a member of the same sex while they're being admitted to our hospital. During the medical examination, we scan their bodies looking for old injuries as well as new injuries. These body scans can be extremely helpful. We now have high-tech cameras and lights that can reveal injuries underneath the skin. The devices are especially useful in the case of victims who have been choked repeatedly by their intimate partner. The marks show up clearly using this technology. We can then begin to plan to stage an intervention using the information that we've derived from these medical examinations. We assure our patients they're in a safe place and that help is available when and if they want it. This concludes our update on intimate partner violence and the sexual revolution. However, it is still a big challenge because abuse and battery by an intimate partner are still underreported due to the stigmas attached to the intimate partner abuse survivor. But this is gradually changing, which is a sign of hope. Please like this webinar and leave a comment. Thanks again, and see you next time in Watson's Wellness Corner.